welcome to a review of the Aska Supercommuter, a fast 45 km/h e-bike. In a market that is dominated by sleek e-bikes with sports car designs, this is a more playful design that doesn't mind some light off-road action. Bike, in other words, that you are meant to get dirty. And in a world where everyone and their sister seems to want an SUV and gravel bikes are becoming ever more popular, I think this could very well be a very effective sales pitch, provided, of course, that it's a solid product that delivers on its promises, which is what we hope to find out in this review, so stick with us. Aska is a smallish Belgian company, and I'm not going to give you a full company profile because I know you're just here for the bike, but two things did strike me. One, they produce as much as possible of the bike locally with nearly everything sourced in Europe, and that makes for short supply lines and hands-on quality control. Two, they work with off-the-shelf parts except for the frame and the battery. And if you're wondering why that should even matter to you as a customer, well, the e-bike market is in a weird place right now. Lots of overstock and supply chain issues these last few years. Sales are down, secondhand e-bikes are flooding the market, so it is safe to say that not every manufacturer is going to last as long as you want your expensive e-bike to last. And in that scenario, off-the-shelf parts will be a lot easier to repair or replace than custom parts. If you want a textbook example of that, just Google Van Moof bankruptcy. But let's start with the design. Stromer is still the best-selling fast e-bike brand. They own about half of the market, and they have a marketing slogan that goes, "The executive among speed pedelecs." I imagine that sounds real impressive in German. I also imagine that the typical Aska bike client will read that and go, well, who wants to be an executive after hours? Wouldn't you rather be an adventurer? I think that kind of sums up what Aska stands for, and it's right there in the design. This is a geometry that stands out with sharp, low poly lines, almost like a Tesla Cybertruck, though luckily a lot less pompous. It takes a while to get used to, but it did grow on me. The demo unit that I tested was the model with the 700 watt-hour range extender mounted on top of the down tube, and that inevitably adds some bulk, but I think they all in all did a great job of integrating that extra battery without compromising the looks of the Supercommuter. Batteries are getting bigger all around, and you can see different approaches, different design approaches to deal with that across brands. I think this is not a bad look. It does get rid of the mounting points on the down tube, so mounting bottles or locks will require a bit more creativity. There's no traditional frame lock, by the way, simply because there's nowhere to put it. There have been a few refinements since the bike's launch, with the boxy head unit giving way to a more traditional design in the front. Initially, the whole frame used to be spray painted. With the new models, only the aluminum covers are, and that also allows you to change the color of your bike by buying an extra set of covers or having them custom wrapped with your company logo or your favorite YouTube channel. I think both are improvements, and the front now reminds me of Riesenmüller's Supercharger, which is still one of my all-time favorite designs. You can tell that they were inspired by mountain bike designs, and that rear suspension obviously defines the look, but 9 out of 10 customers actually buy these with a rear rack for commuting, and of course that kind of domesticates the off-road look. The seat post is pretty long, and that also has to do with the fact that Aska is a small company. As you can see, only the bigger brands are able to offer multiple frame sizes, so customization is limited. And that means that if you are average size, you're probably going to be okay with this design, but if you're shorter or taller than average, that will impact your position on the bike, so make sure to test it thoroughly, which you should be doing anyway. Actually, with a bike like this, for me at 185 centimeters, 6'1", I was fine. I actually sat a bit more upright than I had anticipated. In all, I think Aska's design is one of its strong points. Same goes for their color options. They've recently expanded those, and I think most of them look great. You may not get to choose the frame size, but Aska definitely gives you a lot more color options and more on-trend colors than the market leaders do. That said, apparently people aren't that adventurous when it comes to colors, because the best-selling color is actually dark gray. That rear suspension is probably the first thing that you'll notice when you get on the bike. The bike consists of two parts with a pivot in the middle, and the idea is that by pivoting, it keeps your tires in contact with the floor at all times, improving traction and control. And I actually did notice this more than I thought I would. I guess I assumed that full suspension would matter as much on relatively smooth roads, but I can't deny that it's pretty noticeable. I think I know my commute by heart by now. I think I know every bump in the road, and they're still there. This doesn't magically turn Belgian roads into Dutch ones, but it does smooth things out considerably. The full suspension is the thing that makes Aska stand out in the market. As far as I'm aware, they're the only ones that combine rear suspension with a powerful rear hub motor. And if you're wondering why no one else does it, well, it adds cost, it adds weight, it adds complexity. And you could argue that it's a bit like buying a 4x4 all-wheel drive car to mostly drive on the freeway. And that is a fair point, but a 4x4 in the right situation is a thing of beauty that can really save the day. And it's really nice with the Aska to be able to plan a ride and take the nicest route, even if it takes you slightly off-road or over stretches of cobblestone. That said, I was slightly concerned about the possibility of speed wobble or shimmy because I've read posts by a couple of Aska owners who have experienced some wobble, especially at higher speeds and with a lot of weight on the rear rack. The bike oscillating, being hard to control with only one hand on the handlebars, and this worried me because I do tend to haul a fair amount of weight. And speed, well, you don't buy a bike like this to just do 25 kilometers an hour, right? So I've tried to recreate this, but it hasn't happened in my testing. I've ridden with fairly heavy weights, let's say up to 15 to 20 kilograms at top speeds, and I did not experience any wobble, even riding with my hands off the handlebars. No issues, always felt in control. So that was a relief. But speed wobble can theoretically happen on every bike. It depends on all kinds of factors, including the weight of the rider. But it seems that the Aska might be slightly more susceptible. So it's probably a good idea to keep an eye out for this during your test ride, loaded up with the heaviest stuff that you're going to be taking to work. Take your hands off the handlebars if you're comfortable with that. See if there is any hint of speed wobble for you. I am left with the feeling that the Aska is perhaps not the ideal bike for people who routinely carry a lot of weight on the rear rack, because while I didn't notice any speed wobble, I do feel that the bike just doesn't deal with heavy loads as well as traditional hardtail bikes do. And that suspension protects you as a rider from the impact of bumps, but not the cargo. If you look at a design like this recent Mueller Super Delight, the rear rack there is connected to the part of the bike that is, suspended, but that's not the case with the Aska. And aesthetically, that is definitely a win, but it means that you have to think about what you're transporting when you go off-road. I myself carry a fair amount of camera gear, and the Aska suspension encourages you to choose the bumpy roads, but it doesn't protect the cargo, and that is something to be aware of. A bike like this may be marketed as an adventure bike, but I think in reality, this is mostly used for straight-to-meeting commuting. And by straight-to-meeting, I mean you get off the bike, walk into a meeting, be on time, and not smell. And the good news is that the Aska is a great fit for that use scenario. The core system that it's built around is a Neodrive's 1000-watt motor, a Gates carbon belt, and a pinion gearbox. And together, that makes for a high-end drivetrain with enough power to get you there at 45 an hour without breaking a sweat. I use an Apple Watch to track my rides, and while riding to work, I kept getting a notification in my earbuds along the lines of, "Are you done with your outdoor cycling workout?" So if you're wondering whether it's a workout to drive to work on this thing, Siri doesn't seem to think so. There's 5 assistance levels, and when I say straight to meeting, that to me would be level 4 or 5, at least if I am in a hurry. Level 3 reminded me a bit of a Bosch mid-motor at max assistance. It can definitely get you there, but depending on how fit you are, you may have to choose between taking slightly more time and taking a shower. The Aska representative was a bit careful in recommending using the highest assistance level, saying things like, well, level 3 is already very powerful, there's no need to push the motor to the limit all the time. And from what I gather online, they may be careful because the Neodrive's motor is a bit more conservative in preventing overheating than a comparable motor like Stromer's TDCM motors. And And so if you drive in max assistance level all the time, your assistance might drop in certain situations to protect the motor. I was curious about this, and so I used it on level 5 for a big chunk of my testing in autumn weather, about 5 degrees Celsius, and I don't think I've hit that threshold on normal roads. There was one off-road stretch uphill, about 10%, pretty rough terrain where I felt like I wasn't getting much assistance despite being on level 5, but that was really a mountain bike trail pretty far from the conditions where you would expect a rear hub motor to shine. So in my testing, no overheating issues, no reason to stay below level 4 when you're in a hurry, but I will say, and maybe that's the reason that the Aska representative wasn't keen on recommending the max support level, that the difference in range between levels 3, 4, and 5 is pretty significant, certainly larger than the difference in speed or user power required. The support that a drivetrain delivers is very smooth and natural, no jerkiness, no fluctuating support levels, all feels very reliable, and coupled with an excellent suspension, you kind of get the feeling that you sometimes get in expensive cars where you don't notice how far you're going. I had more than a couple of instances where I felt like the bike was holding back only to notice that the speed limiter was kicking in because it was already at 45 an hour. That speed limiter can feel a bit aggressive sometimes, by the way. Noise levels are excellent, much quieter than a mid-motor or an LEO, though in my demo unit the silence was occasionally broken by a bit of creaking near the front of the top tube. So I think we've established that there's enough power here, but as always, you do have to shift wisely to harness it. I'm a big fan of Pinion's gearboxes, but I never tested the manual 6-speed, and I had kind of expected it to be not enough for a bike like this, but it actually has a fair amount of range. What you get here is more or less the same as the C1.12 minus the lowest 4 gears and spaced a little differently. Now, because that 12-speed has an insane range and you only lose these super low gears that don't really match the intended use for this kind of bike, I was pleasantly surprised with the real-world performance of the 6-speed. It's true that the gaps between the gears are a bit wide, but other than that, everything you need is here with the same insane range on the high end of the 12-speed, meaning that you can go 45 an hour and still only be doing 70 rounds per minute, which is a very comfortable cadence. If you do want more gears, you can upgrade to Pinion's 12-speed Smart Shift, but more on that later. Aska strikes me as a careful and no-nonsense company, and so you won't see any of those inflated max range estimates on their website. They have a blog post on their website where they show you the range that you might get in different scenarios and how that depends on the weight of the driver and the wind and the temperatures and so on. But of course, we all just want a number. And so I'll give you a couple of numbers based on a few of my test rides to work. Definitely not as super scientific, but just to give you a ballpark idea of what to expect. I would estimate the range on max assist to be just under 50 kilometers for the base model. So if we take some safety margins for colder weather and aging batteries, I would recommend this for commutes of up to 35 to 40 kilometers. That is, if you can charge at work. With the range extender, you can do up to 84 kilometers, and that is gonna cover just about everyone's commute, I think. As soon as you lower the support level to 4, which is still enough to do 40 kilometers an hour without breaking a sweat, those numbers go way up. So Aska may be careful, and you should test in your typical circumstances, but there is definitely a lot to work with here. For my use case, the base model should be enough. I'm doing 37, 38 kilometers, but I kind of prefer to buy a bit more battery than I need because that actually will make your battery last longer because batteries don't like to be discharged all the way. And so I'm kind of torn between the base model and the range extender. Having a great drivetrain and good range, of course, is a great start, but you do need a lot of other stuff to make bike work: lights, brakes, saddle, pedals, mirrors, and so on. Great gear can really redeem even an average bike. And the good news is that you can fit the Aska with the best of the best by choosing the performance pack when ordering. That gets you the Magura MT5 brakes, the Supernova M99 Pro 2 headlight, and upgraded Fox suspension front and back. Very happy with those, really refined control and tremendous stopping power on the brakes. And the Supernova, I think just about everyone agrees, is the best headlight on the market. A ton of light, well spread out, and a very sharp cutoff at the top so you can light as much terrain as possible without blinding anyone. That doesn't mean that the default gear is bad. I only got to test the full option model myself, so I can't give you any first-hand findings, but reviews seem fairly positive. And you know, that performance pack is quite expensive at 1,700 euros. So I'm guessing it's mostly gonna appeal to people with deep pockets and strong opinions about things like brakes and suspensions. I am a big fan of the Ergotech mirror that comes standard. As far as I'm concerned, mirrors should never stick out at the sides, and putting it underneath the handlebars is just the cleanest solution with a nice wide view. I didn't care much for the stock saddle, but that is of course both very personal and very easy to replace. As for the tires, I took the bike on some off-road sections to kind of explore the limits of what you can expect, and the first thing that I noticed is that when you take it a bit too far, when you take it on to light mountain bike trails, in its default state, the tires become a problem before the drivetrain does. Aska comes with the Schwalbe Marathon efficiency tires, and you quickly notice that those are fine, but they are built for road and maybe light gravel, definitely not for trails. So let's go over some of the other options, because there's quite the range from the 8K base model all the way up to the 12,855 euros full option model, which includes just about every option on the market with just a couple of small exceptions like maybe ABS or second generation Pinion Smart Shift, but that is a very short list, as of course it should be at prices like these. The base model is fairly close in price to the most sold models on the market by Stromer and Klever, and that's probably not a coincidence marketing wise, but I would probably advise to skip the base model because that has a chain and a derailleur, and for 300 euros more you get a Gates carbon belt, and I think that's a no-brainer option for a bike like this, just in terms of maintenance and durability. The more distance that you do, the more you'll appreciate that belt, and I'm guessing you plan to do a lot of distance or you wouldn't be watching videos about super expensive bikes. Am I right? Other options: for 900 euros, you can upgrade the manual pinion transmission to a button shifter like you'd find on a mountain bike. And by all accounts, this is a great system. It shifts really fast and it comes with 12 gears instead of the 6 gears on the manual transmission. Now, I'm a bit hesitant to recommend that as an option because the Aska lacks an important feature of the Smart Shift system, the ability to set a starting gear. On most Smart Shift systems, like on the Stromer ST5 or indeed roll-off hubs with digital controls, you can, for example, set gear 4 as your starting gear, and every time you stop at a red light, the system will automatically shift down to gear 4 to get you started. But that requires integration with the display with a NeoDrive system, and that is not here. Also means you can't see what gear you're in on the display. So nothing wrong with the Smart Shift system, just be warned that you're not getting all of its functionality here. Option number 2, the full option bike that I tested came with a 700 watt-hour range extender, and with a total of 1700 watt-hour, the Aska becomes a long-range powerhouse with a bigger battery than the Stromer ST7, bigger than Klever's new 1600 watt-hour battery. It's a godsend for people with very long commutes, and I love that it can be retrofitted onto all existing Aska bikes. But it does have a couple of downsides. It's expensive, it adds weight and bulk, and you do need to charge both batteries separately. The charger has a splitter that you can plug into both batteries, and since the range extender is non-removable, if you want to charge your batteries at the office and charge the range extender as well, you need 2 chargers, and these puppies are not exactly small or cheap. Also, a full charge takes up to 9 hours, so you may have to plan accordingly. Lastly, a couple of words on the interface, because that's an often overlooked part of the e-bike experience. There's no button overload on the Aska. It's all nicely laid out, but the bottom buttons were a bit hard to press on my demo bike, and the side buttons on the NeoDrive mode didn't register every press. As I said, Aska strikes me as a no-nonsense company wanting to make no-nonsense products, and I imagine they kind of like the simple design that the NeoDrive system comes with. And the visibility is indeed excellent, but this is very light on info. There's not even a range indicator, so you'll have to do your own estimates. I don't know why, but it seems to me that there just aren't any fast e-bikes with rear hub motors that have a really good display. If you compare this to Bosch's Nyon or DJI's new Avinox system, those just seem generations ahead. Aska's display gets the job done, but in terms of looks, features, and integration with the rest of the bike, lights, the gears, it's a bit basic for such an expensive bike. On the bright side, and also very no-nonsense, speeds on the Aska's display are pretty exact, maybe 1 kilometer an hour off, but definitely more accurate than the speedometers on Bosch or Elio systems. In conclusion, I believe that most of us spend way too much time inside, which is why I have a soft spot for products that motivate you to get outside, and the Aska bike is a prime example of that. It makes bike commuting fun, it encourages you to explore, it looks the part, and I don't think I've ever ridden a bike that makes 45 an hour feel quite so slow. It's a versatile bike that can get you places, perhaps a bit on the expensive side if we're honest, especially if you add a lot of options, but you mostly get what you pay for. It's not as sleek as some of the other brands like Sturmer or Opium, no integrated handlebars where all the wires are internal, no seamless construction, but I reckon that good suspension is gonna make at least as many people happy than the absence of visible wires. Aska already made some subtle improvements on the first generation of this bike. In the future, I think it would be great if they could work with Neo drives to further improve the interface, maybe improve the smart shift integration, and also look for ways to make it so that you can use the highest assistance modes in every situation without having to worry about the motor. That would really make it a supercommuter. Oh, and if there were ever a way to upgrade the base model to 1200 watt hours without the range extender, that would truly be awesome. I would probably not recommend this bike to people who routinely haul a lot of gear, and if you only commute over perfectly smooth asphalt, then all that suspension is indeed overkill. But I think a lot of people are gonna like the way that this rides. So if the design speaks to you, do go test it out and let us know in the comments what you think. Many thanks for watching, and see you next time.